Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for being here. We'll give it just like a minute or two for people to join, but we are recording the webinar. So if you have to leave, then we will have the recording for you to catch up what you missed. So thank you again for joining. I'm loving seeing all of these familiar names popping in. We will have the chat open, I believe. And my colleague Colton is with me, and so Colton can be monitoring the chat. Feel free to introduce yourselves, to say hi. Also, with the webinar chat is where you'll be able to drop questions. Excellent, great. The chat is working. Perfect. Thank you, Lynn. So feel free to chat amongst yourselves in there. Introduce yourselves if you like. And we can also address your questions towards the end. So given we have an hour here, I'm going to go ahead and start the session. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge that we're gathering today on the traditional lands of the Tonkawa, Comanche, Lipan Apache, and Coahuilcoten peoples. We honor the indigenous communities who have cared for this land for generations and whose presence continues today. As we gather, even virtually, may we do so with intention and humility and commit ourselves to using our work, our voices, and our decisions to contribute to a more just and compassionate world. So welcome everyone. My name is Fiona Dawson. I'm the Senior Director of Partnerships at the Austin LGBT Chamber of Commerce. I'm joined with my colleague, Colton Asherbranner, Vice President of Marketing Communications. He's here. He's just not showing his video right now, but he's with you in chat. And then our CEO, Todd Hogan, and Senior Director of Strategic Operations, Amy Clooney, are also joining us virtually as they are heading for a business conference in Detroit today. We are all extremely glad you're here. And we're also very grateful that this event is ASL accessible with ASL interpretation provided by Amber G Productions. So thank you so much, Amber. We love having you here. And so today is March 31st and is the annual Transgender Day of Visibility. I am actually a cisgender, bisexual immigrant woman living with a non-apparent disability who strives to be the best trans ally I can. And today we are here to recognize transgender people, their contributions, their leadership, and their lives. And it's also a day to acknowledge the realities that many in the trans community are navigating right now. So for a little bit of context, about 1% of people in the United States identifies transgender, which is roughly 2.8 million people. And here in Texas, that represents well over 100,000 people, making Texas one of the largest transgender populations in the country. Studies also show that LGBTQ plus people are more likely to be living in the South. And importantly, these numbers are higher among younger generations. So this means that this is increasingly relevant for workplaces now and into the future. These are your employees, your colleagues, your customers, your community, your family, and your friends. And yet at the same time, transgender people continue to face high rates of discrimination in employment, housing, and public spaces. And quite frankly, it feels worse than discrimination. It is a blatant attack, and we have to be here as allies to stand up. So there is the current Texas bathroom bill, which is Senate Bill 8, and it went into effect December 4th, 2025. As somebody who works for an organization that works a lot with businesses, I have come across many people who weren't even aware that Texas currently has a bathroom ban or bathroom bill in place, but it's actually been around for about 3 months. And what we're seeing is that many business leaders don't fully know what the law says, how it applies to them, or what they should be doing in response. And so we're here for for an hour. We're going to end the webinar at 1 p.m. and I want to leave plenty of time for questions. So if you have a question, please feel free to either drop it in the chat or make a note. We're going to do the whole panel and then we'll answer Q&A at the end. So I want to make sure that we get as many questions answered as possible. And thank you, Colton, for monitoring all of that. So here I'm joined by some incredible panelists who are bringing legal, policy, and business and community perspectives. First is Landon Ritchie. Landon is policy coordinator for the Transgender Education Network of Texas, acronym being TENT. He works across public and private forums to combat policies targeting trans and gender expansive, or TGE, Texans. He advances policies and strategies that protect TGE Texans and to achieve a Texas in which TGE individuals can not only survive, but thrive. Thank you, Landon. Next is Shelley L. Skeen. Shelley is the regional director at Lambda Legal, a national organization advancing the civil rights of LGBTQ people through litigation, education, and public policy. She brings a strong legal perspective on how laws impact both individuals and institutions. And we have Sophia Sepulveda. Sophia, I'm very sorry if my pronunciation was dreadful on your last name right now. I put it down, it's the English accent, it just gets in the way, that's what it is. Sophia's field director at Equality Texas and also a dear friend. And she works across the state to engage communities, mobilize advocates, and connect policy to lived experience. So thank you all so much for being here. So I really want to dive directly into what is this bill and what does it actually say and what does it mean now that it's in effect. So I offer this question to all three of you. I'm thinking Shelley may go first from the legal perspective, but please can we first start to educate the audience on what exactly this bill is?
Sure, I'll go first. All right, so here's the scoop, y'all. There are about 21 states that have similar bans that are now in place. They're a little bit different in different states across the country. And Landon will talk a little bit more, but we have 4 states that actually criminalize using a bathroom that does not match the sex you were assigned at birth. So here in Texas, our bill, as Fiona just said, went into effect on December the 4th of last year. And what does it do? It says for any publicly owned building or a state agency or a shelter or a prison, for those particular entities, you're not going to be able to use the bathroom that matches your gender identity. But what else does it do? So that applies to public schools, it applies to universities, it applies to the Texas Department of Transportation. If you go there, it applies in courthouses, it applies at the state capitol. When we talk about shelters, there are about 90 shelters that it would apply to potentially in this state. We can come back to that. And then also for prisons, it applies to, there's about 1,750 trans folks that are housed in prisons in the state of Texas, and they are already using bathrooms or facilities that match the sex they were assigned at birth. So that's where it applies. It does not apply to private businesses. So just to be really, really clear, it doesn't apply to private businesses. And so how is it enforced? That's one of the big questions, because the language of the bill says that those entities that are publicly owned, so city and county and all of what I just described, those entities are the entities that are going to get fined if someone is using a bathroom that doesn't match their gender identity. So what does that mean? It means any person can say someone is using a bathroom that doesn't match their sex assigned at birth. They have to file a written complaint with that particular public agency. I'll just call it a public entity. Why don't we call it that? And then that entity has 3 days to cure that complaint, meaning that if people are using a bathroom that does not match the sex they were assigned at birth, if that entity does not fix that, then the complaint can be made to the Attorney General's office. Then the Attorney General would come in and do an investigation. The authors of the bill Mays Middleton out of Galveston, and then a gal, her last name is Orr, she's a state rep, say that that does not include, the investigation would not include, for example, a physical exam, and would not include the requirement that people show their driver's license, assuming they have a driver's license that matches who they are. But it doesn't say that those things cannot happen either. So we don't really know how this is going to be enforced, but we do know that the person who's making the complaint has to go first to the public entity, and then if it's not resolved within 3 days, then the complaint can be made to the Attorney General's office. And then what can the Attorney General do? If there is what's called substantive evidence of a violation, then the Attorney General can fine that particular entity $25,000. And then for every subsequent time that there is, quote unquote, an alleged offense, then per day, that entity can be fined $125,000. So what does that mean in real life? That means that schools, universities, open enrollment charter schools are included, state agencies, shelters, and prisons could be fined. So they have an incentive to make sure that folks are using the bathroom that matches the sex that they were assigned at birth. What does it do? It erases anyone who's born with intersex traits. And we know that about 1.9% of our population is born with intersex traits, which, if you look at Fiona's hair, about 1.9% of the population is born with red hair. So the bill itself is meant to be ambiguous, but the clear thing to know is that it does not apply to businesses, privately owned businesses. So I just wanted, so hopefully that didn't go on too long, but I don't know if anybody else has anything to add.
Yes, Sophia, Landon, do you want to add or jump into that? Otherwise, I was going to move to deeper yeah, go, Landon.
There, Shelley gave a great overview of SB8. Did want to point out that there are exceptions in the bill. So this is for law enforcement, emergency personnel, caretakers, elderly folks who need assistance using the restroom, folks with disabilities who need assistance using facilities, children under the age of 10, so 9 years of age or younger. I don't know why they picked 9 as the age. It seems pretty arbitrary, but this bill doesn't make a lot of sense as it is. And also, it only applies in multi-occupancy private spaces. So a single occupancy restroom that is labeled male or labeled female is still not subject to SB8 because it isn't meant for multiple stalls, multiple people existing there in the same time. And also, it does not fine individuals. In and of itself, SB8 doesn't fine individuals. So the $25,000 and $125,000 fines are for the entities, not for people who are accused of violating SB8. And so there are bills that exist, laws that exist that do contain those types of penalties for individuals, but SB8 is not one of them.
Thank you. Sophia, did you want to say something?
Yeah, the only thing that I wanted to be clear, this bill is only for public buildings, government-owned buildings, not for private business. And this only affects the buildings. It doesn't affect the people. That's it.
Yeah, can you expand on that when you said it affects the buildings, not the people? Expand on that, please.
Of course, like it is meant for us to not enter those bathrooms, but the kind of like Landon just said, right? And Shelley stated earlier, this affects only, the fines only affects those people, right? Right, not the people, it affects the building. So when it comes to making the complaint goes against the building. Like if me, Sophia, was to go to court because I have a, I don't know, jury duty that have to be there for 8 to 10 hours waiting to be called, and I have to use the restroom, I am going to use the restroom that I feel more comfortable in. And if somebody wants to put a complaint, it will be the city court house that will be placing the complaint and receiving the fine. It will not be Sophia who will be receiving the fine.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go. Yeah.
Yeah, one quick thing to add to that too. The bill itself is written so that if someone is working, for example, in the courthouse and they believe that someone is using the wrong quote unquote, or I'm going to say the bathroom that does not match someone's sex assigned at birth, then they also can lodge a complaint. So, say you've got a bailiff or a judge, or hopefully they wouldn't be doing any such things, but people that work at the courthouse, in Sophia's example, could also lodge a complaint. The only type of relief, however, that they can be granted would be injunctive relief or declaratory relief. So what does that mean? That just means that if they're working in the same building with someone who they think is using a bathroom that does not match their sex assigned at birth, then that person could get the relief of having the person who's using the bathroom not use that bathroom. So it's a little bit of a wrinkle. I hope that's not confusing to folks, but that still means the building itself can be fined, but individuals could stop another person from using a bathroom that does not match the sex they were assigned at birth, if that makes sense. But there's no criminal penalties in this bill, y'all. So please be clear. You can't be criminalized for using a bathroom that does not match the sex you were assigned at birth.
Great. So not criminalized, fined. That's the difference. Okay. Before we
And I
move on
think
to, sorry,
and I don't
carry
mean
on.
to intrude, but I feel like what Shelley said is super important, right? Because that is the nefarious thing about this bill, is to putting people against people, is to putting worker against workers, to pitting neighbors against neighbors. So it's relying on people literally ratting against your neighbor, against your coworker, in order for this law to be successful. So the one thing that I've been telling people, if you see a trans person entering the restroom, you did not.
Before we move on to what you've seen and its impact, there's one other thing I want to clarify, and that is, does it affect the airport? I know from a business perspective, we want to attract people to come to our state to do business with us. You know, personal notes, we want to travel. If a trans person arrives at the Austin airport, would they be fined for using the restroom according to their gender rather than their sex?
Let me go. I'll go real fast. So the short answer is no. But if you're in a state like Florida, then the answer is the airports in Florida are subject to state law, and there is a provision under the state law in Florida that bans folks from using bathrooms that match who they are, saying that it specifically applies to airports. So that's what it says, but you can't stop an individual person at an airport from potentially thinking that someone is doing the wrong thing. But the airport itself should not be fined, at least in our Austin example.
Okay, thank you. So for business leaders, like trying to balance compliance, employee well-being, customer experience, what does that look like today? And again, I'm like saying that question out loud and realizing you've just said that, you know, businesses are not included in this bill. Is that correct? And if so, if you understand that this is for public buildings, like what can businesses do in this environment?
Landon or Sophia, Sophia, go
It's
first,
like
and then I'll jump in.
the reality is, like, business should not be over complying on this bill at all. They should definitely allow trans people to use the restroom we identified with, because this bill again only affects public business. If I go to a restaurant because I'm hungry and I stay there because some friends and I are having a nice dinner, and if I need to use the restroom, it's a private business, I can use the restroom. businesses should not be over-complying. Over-complying is just allowing the Texas to continue pushing these laws against our communities. So if you see something, if you see a private business, please contact Equality Texas, TANT, so we can reach out to Lambda Legal. Don't reach out to Lambda Legal. They have a lot of work to do. Reach out to us, and then we can reach out to Lambda Legal, right? But so we can get a case, because businesses should not be denying you access to the restroom at all. If you go, well, Ulta doesn't have restroom, but if you go to the movies, if you want to go to the movies and you're using the restroom, you should be using the restroom you align with, because private businesses have no legal ground on this business, on this law. You should be able to use the restroom that you align with in any private business, right? Again, this is only go to public owned entities. And we didn't even touch parks. If you are in a public park, you cannot use the restroom on a public. I mean, I would be using the restroom, but technically, you cannot use the restroom in a public park, right? Because it's a public-owned business or a public-owned entity. But if you go into the movie theaters, use the restroom. It is legal. This bill only goes to public-owned places, not businesses. So if you see a business trying to harass you, please contact us so we can launch an investigation. This should not be happening to you or to anybody in community.
Can I add just real quickly a couple things? Number one is, yes, reach out to Tent and reach out to Equality Texas, but also reach out to Lambda. We have a help desk, and we are fully staffed at our help desk. We have 4 full-time attorneys, and we take intakes for people who feel like they've been treated unfairly. And so we have also a ton of resources. We have written resources on SB 8 on the bathroom ban here, as well as other resources. So do reach out to us as well. Sometimes that's where we actually get the plaintiffs for our cases. I'm not saying that we're suing on this. And then one more caveat is, I'm not providing any legal advice today during this webinar, but let me also say to everyone, if you have been an employee in a business with 15 or more employees since the early 90s, as a result of a Supreme Court case called Price Waterhouse versus Hopkins. We're not going to do a quiz after this. People have been using the bathroom that matches who they are in the workplace since 1990-ish, right? And so there's never, ever been a problem. So businesses need to be fully clear that they have to comply with respect to their employees, with federal law, and they also have to comply with other federal laws that have to do with what I'm going to call public accommodations, which is movie theaters, restaurants, concert halls, and all of those things. You cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. And we know from other Supreme Court decisions, you can't discriminate against transgender folks, right? So know that that's there. That's really strong and really powerful. So businesses should absolutely be affirming their employees for all of the other reasons that have nothing to do with what the law requires, but just because it's the right thing to do. But the law is already there, and it's been there for what, 40, I'm a lawyer, can't add, but a long time.
And I did want to add, I was going to bring up cases like Bostock and protections on the basis of sex. And I think an easy step that companies, businesses, et cetera, can take right now is look at where in your facilities you have gender neutral restrooms and see whether or not they are still sex segregated. It can be as easy as temporarily placing a paper sign over that saying that it is gender neutral, and in the longer term, affixing a proper ADA compliant sign with Braille and all of that to that restroom, designating it as gender neutral. That is going to benefit everybody, not just trans people. It's going to cut down on confusion. It's going to increase privacy and dignity for everyone. The city of Austin recently has been auditing all of their city-owned property to determine where in the city their buildings lack single occupancy restrooms and prioritizing which ones of those to then install those single occupancy restrooms to make sure folks have access and options. And so that's a longer term goal. Installing a restroom is not cheap and not fast, but also keeping that in mind, just making sure folks have accessibility and options in their places of work, in leisure, for visitors, for staff, employees, all of that.
Thank you, Landon. I see we're getting some great questions in, and I also want to bring up what action people can take for the future. Before we get into that, I would love for you to share, and I know, Sophia, you were sharing some stuff before we started the webinar, and Landon, I'm sure you've got stories too. Like, what impact have you seen this bill already have? Like, what kind of things have been happening in Texas since this bill was introduced?
You want to start, Landon? I feel like I started.
No, you go, you go.
It's a lot of confusion, kind of like what we're saying right now. It's been a lot of confusion on businesses, and not just on businesses, but in people in particular, right? Like, where can I go to the bathroom? I've heard a lot of, we've been going, I know that Tent has been going on tour. We'll be going on tour across Texas too. And the question that we've been seeing is like, I'm just rather hold it until I get home. Don't hold that you can get a UTI. Please do not hold your pee. Please go to the restroom. And again, this bill is only on public spaces. Go to a if you're going to a private entity, you can use the restroom. So it's been a lot of confusion as to which restrooms actually affects. Also, one thing that we've noticed, and this is because a group of trans folks decided to do a rally at the Capitol, is they are targeting us trans women. They're not targeting trans men, right? This bill appears, yes, it's written in a way that is aimed to target all trans folks, but the reality is they're targeting trans women and female appearing people, right? Or femme appearing people. Those are the only people that are targeting. So like somebody else asked in the chat, what can we do as cis allies? If you're a cisgender woman, go with your trans femme presenting person to the restroom. Go with them so they can feel safe, right? Like I feel very safe in the restroom by myself, but there is a lot of trans people who don't feel safe. Go with them. Go with them and ensure that that you're that safe person. But it's just a lot of confusion. So thank you, Fiona, for putting this panel together so we can demystify the confusion that still exists within this bills. And again, somebody says, how are we going to enforce this law? There is no way to enforce this law because we don't know who is trans or who is not based just on the looks, right? We saw a cop who is actually an Austin City policeman who testified during the bathroom bill, whose office is literally directly at the Austin bathroom on the bathroom in the police department. He said, I've been in that office for 10 years. I cannot tell you who's trans and who's not. So there is no way to enforce this. Who is the person who most assimilates to the idea of femininity that we have as Americans, right? Who is the one who's 5'4", 90 pounds, who aligns to this idea of femininity and beauty, right? Versus who doesn't align to that idea, right? And at the end, we've seen, in particular in states where these laws have been passed, is affecting mostly cisgender women more so than transgender women. A cisgender woman who has been accosted in the bathroom, who have been brutalized by men coming to the bathroom, telling them that they're not women enough to use the restroom. We saw the case in Walmart in Florida. We saw it in Massachusetts. We saw it in New York. So it's been happening. It's just, again, this law aims to target trans women, albeit, yes, it's affecting trans men, but it's aims to attack trans women. I don't know if you want to get off mute, Landon, and continue this rant, because I'm going to rant forever.
I can add a few points. I think that was really important what you said, Sophia, about the way that SB8, because of how it's written, because of the stereotypes that it reinforces, everybody is impacted, not just trans people, folks who don't conform to these rigid gender stereotypes. I mean, we talk all the time with cis women who present more masculinely, having stories about being harassed and targeted in restrooms in Texas because somebody thought that they were trans or thought that they didn't belong in that specific restroom. And so we are expecting to see this sort of rhetoric and scrutiny on people's gender presentation exacerbate the experiences people have in public restrooms already. And we, with SB8 specifically, in the public entities that it applies to, we're seeing it impact students in dorms who have been forced to move dorms because they were in the incorrect ones. There have been campuses like U of H, my alma mater, a gender neutral restroom in the Graduate College of Social Work was changed into a women's restroom, and the students who relied on the access of that restroom in a building where there is not another gender neutral restroom, administration is telling students you have to go to another building to pee. And also over complying in the sense that they have no lenience for students with disabilities in that circumstance either. Public or employees of public entities have been threatened with consequences, including termination for repeat violations of SB8. And so it is playing out exactly as expected, which is very piecemeal patchwork, confusing, and harmful for the people that it's intended to harm, and anybody who is collateral, which is also a part. Somebody said in the chat that confusion is a feature, not a bug. That's absolutely the case.
Thank you. Before we move on to these great questions I see coming in, I want to bring up what happened last week in Idaho. And thank you, Landon, for bringing this up to me last week. Last week, Idaho passed what may be one of the most restrictive bathroom bills in the country. So unlike Texas, this legislation applies not only to government buildings, but also to private businesses. So under this law, using a restroom that does not align with a person's sex assigned at birth could be considered a criminal offense, with penalties that include up to a year in prison and harsher consequences for repeat violations. So while Texas law today is more limited in scope, we're seeing movement in other states that expands it to the private sector in very direct and enforceable ways. How can our audience, how can we all address this to ensure that this does not happen in Texas too? And Landon, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can hop in, and I would love for Sophia and Shelley to also chime in when I've said my piece. But I think something that we unfortunately saw this session is a retreat from the private sector in advocacy at the Capitol in support of trans and gender expansive and queer folks. Back in 2016, when North Carolina introduced the nation's first highest profile bathroom bill, there were over 59 companies that bought this bill, and not just like smaller companies, but Fortune 500, very influential and impactful corporations. And that pushback lent itself to defeating the bill in concert with community advocacy and organizing and political magic, right? We saw a similar response from the business sector here in Texas the following year when the first bathroom bill in Texas, SB6, was introduced. And again, after a regular session and 2 or 3 special sessions that year, SB6 was defeated, and we were able to keep it at bay for the next 10 years and 16 attempts over that period. But we also have seen an increase in how many anti-LGBTQ plus bills, especially anti-trans bills, are being filed each year. And we are unfortunately not seeing that same energy from our supposed business and corporate allies in combating those pieces of legislation in support of the folks who frequent their businesses, who work at these businesses and companies. And so it's really imperative for come the 2027 legislative session for businesses to put their money where their mouths are, to go to the Capitol to advocate, testify against these bills, to talk to the representatives and senators who have jurisdiction over your headquarters, over a regional office. It's not just a human issue. That is, of course, the central component, but anti-trans, anti-queer policies are bad for business, are bad for the Texas economy. People do not want to live in, work in, travel to a state that is not going to protect them and that is actively harming and implementing hostile policies against them. And so when folks who are trans, who are queer, otherwise marginalized, have institutional protections in the state that we live and work and visit, it benefits everybody. And so I think it's just really important for that the power that businesses, the private sector has, to be leveraged in politics, in the legislature, to combat these harmful pieces of legislation.
Thank you, Landon, for saying this. And we have right now the amazing opportunity, because we are 3 months away from Pride, right? Where all of these corporations and companies show up to our event, to celebrate us, right? To say that they support us. Show up to those Pride events and tell to those companies, are you going to show up to the legislative session? Are you going to show up to it? Now is the time to start putting the pressure on these businesses that say that they support us, right? Like, why are we seeing Target at our Pride events when they took away their DEI component, right? Now is the time to Target. Now is the time to tell them, why are you not supporting the LGBT community? Why are you not showing up at the Capitol and making noise when we need you to make noise? Why are you here at a Pride event when you should be making noise with the legislative session to ensure that you're protecting our most vulnerable? We are, like Shelley said, we are like less than 2% of the population in Texas. 150,000 people around Texas identify as trans. Out of the millions of people that live in Texas, and they're targeting us, we need these corporations to stand up again in 2027, because it's happening. If it's happening in Idaho, it's gonna come into Texas, right? Like, Texas is looking around to see what other harmful legislation is passing across the state so they can bring it here, across the country, to bring it here. Right. So now is the time, if you're going to Pride and if you see a business, tell them, have you heard of Texas Compete? Go to Equality Texas so you can be part of Texas Compete so that we can bring you to the Capitol, right? We need to start organizing this business so we can show up with a bigger voice in 2027 and stop this bill, because if it's happening already, trust and believe is going to show up in 2027.
Kelly, the only thing I would add to that is Sophia's right. We're not in legislative session right now. Texas is a testing ground, and the legislation that we're seeing proposed across the country is legislation that comes from about 3 different groups, one of which is on the Southern Poverty Law Center's list of hate crime groups. And so what we're seeing in other legislators is going to come to us next year, so we can prepare ahead of time. That's one thing. Number 2, there are economic studies that have been performed right here in our state that look at the loss of state revenue, city revenue, county revenue when we are not inclusive. And so we are losing money. And then the other thing is, businesses are fleeing our state. It started with abortion, right? And then it's gone with all of our DEIB bans in public schools, K through 12, and then universities. And then those businesses cannot get people to come here and do work, whether they have trans kids, whether they have kids who identify as women. It's hurting our businesses, and businesses need to step up to the plate and talk about that, because we also have the 2nd largest trans population in the country, other than California.
Thank you. And I'll add, as an LGBT chamber or a chamber of commerce, we're a non-partisan organization. But part of our work is advocacy. And so we're a chamber of commerce that's focused on economic accessibility in Central Texas. We just happen to have somewhat of an understanding, if not expertise, on LGBTQ plus business concerns. And so we collaborate with our coalition partners like your organizations on this panel to ensure that harmful bills that are basically damaging business are not going into place here in Texas. So we're grateful to be working with all of you on that. I'm going to move to the questions that have come up from the audience. The first one, Travis County owns 700 Lavaca Street and non-county offices are leased in that publicly owned building. Are businesses leasing space subject to compliance?
You want me to do it? I'm going to say, knowing our, I guess I need to be careful here about what I do say and what I don't say. Our Attorney General, for anyone who's lived here in Texas for the last several years, is always engaging in what I'm going to call overreach. So the short answer is yes. If you're leasing a building, then you're going to be subject to this as well.
The bill language specifically says owned, controlled, or operated. And so there is, like Shelley said, an opportunity for that overreach to be, in play here. And it was a part of the bill discussion as well. Senator Mays Middleton made the case that like the Texas State Fair, because it was wanting to ban firearms on the premises during fair, it was using and operating a piece of land controlled, owned, or operated by the state of government, and so should be subject to that state law. And so it's sort of an open question, but I think erring on the side of caution would probably be wise to assume and operate as though there may be more scrutiny there.
Thank you. I'm going to go down the questions in order that they've been given to me from the chat. If anyone has questions, if you're able to type it in, that would be amazing. And if you can't, then raise your hand and I'll address any raised hands after we've gone through these. So the next one is going back to the airport example. In the airport example, the person wouldn't be fined in Texas. The airport would be fined. Is that correct? So in Idaho, by contrast, the person would be committing a criminal offense. So I think going back to defining the airport, you're saying that the person would not be fined in Texas. Is that correct? But whereas in Idaho, where it would extend, or Florida, I know is what Shelley had said, it's the airport that's fined.
This is Shelley, and I welcome, obviously, Sophia and Landon too. I think some questions I'm seeing from a couple like Laura and maybe Cheryl, happy to take those offline to give you all more nuance around it. And again, I can't give legal advice today, but happy to talk about it. But the facts, the bill itself says that it is the building or the entity that, what Landon just said, owns or controls that building that is subject to the fine. How the law in Idaho is going to play out, by the way, it goes into effect on July 1st of 2026, is going to be subject to how it's enforced there. So we'd be speculating, but as far as it's the building that gets the fine, not the person who is using the restroom.
Okay. And I think we'd be delighted to follow up offline with a couple of these, I think. There's one though I think that would be good for the general audience. Somebody says, just to review, that this only applies to public buildings. Someone has to snitch in writing. There's no criminal penalty. There might be a fine for the public building, but it can be defeated by one, not snitching, two, going to the bathroom with friends, three, covering or taking down any gender signage, because that defeats the part of the legal argument. So is that correct in review?
Yes, literally, like if you know your city council, and this is not only on big cities, right? Like in San Antonio, when this bill passed, our city council were very close to our city council. Thankfully, I've been organizing in San Antonio for the last 16 years, will be this year. So I'm very connected with my city council. So the first thing they did is like, what can we do? So we send them a lot of instructions as to how to navigate. So they started doing single gender restrooms, and single capacity restrooms. If you have those connections, and if you don't, start doing those connections, right? Like start going to city council, get to know your council people, and start creating those connections. Because that's how we start creating the changes, and that's how those city councils start listening to us, right? If you live on a small place, talk to your city councilman. How can we start creating those restrooms that are more amenable and welcoming to our trans and gender expansive community here in these little towns? I just mentioned going to jury duty. Sometimes we get called to jury duty too. Like I was excited the first time. The second time I was not that excited because I didn't get picked the second time. But like we get called for jury duty. Sometimes it's an 8-hour affair. We have to use the restrooms. Talk to the people who are working on those buildings. How can you make restaurants that are more welcoming to LGBTQ, particularly trans and gender expansive folks, right? Use your privilege as a cisgender person to create those changes. If you don't know a trans person in your life, but you are an ally of the trans community, use that privilege in order to create that change. Sometimes we might not be there, but you love us because you
Mhm.
are want to be our ally. Use that power that you might not know you have. And if you don't know where to start, reach out to Lambda Legal, TAND, Equality Texas. We are here to guide you and to help you into creating those welcoming spaces in your own city.
Mhm. Shelley?
Quick thing, after we're done, I'm happy to share some resources. There's a great Texas Tribune article that is super clear about what this applies to, what the exceptions are. I can share that with you. We can share the economic report with everybody so you can see what that looks like as far as the loss of jobs, revenue, state, local, etc. And so there's a few things that we can share afterwards. Maybe you can send it around if you would.
Right. No, we definitely will be sending this, and we're going to make sure that people can access this recording as well. And we've got one person's hand up, so Masha, I'm going to let you ask your question in a second. I just kind of want to stay on this little topic. So imagine you've got a small business, let's say it's like a small restaurant, and if they currently have gendered restrooms, but they want to be inclusive, and while they're not included in this current bill, because again, this bill is through public buildings, this restaurant's not included, but they kind of want to preempt and they want to be completely supportive. Is the solution I'm hearing is to change the signage to make it, you know, gender neutral, and anyone can use that restroom in private and peace. Is that correct?
I mean, there's no reason for a single occupancy restroom to be gendered at all,
Mm-hmm.
since anybody is able to use it. It's completely private. And so I think that is definitely a great first step. It also reduces the time waiting for a restroom if the men's is open, but the women's is occupied, and somebody who is a woman needs to use the restroom, may think that the men's is not available to them. And so it just creates a whole lot of confusion where there doesn't need to be. And so definitely for single occupancy restrooms, single stall restrooms, making them gender neutral is a great
Mm-hmm.
step to take.
And in an ideal world, like much larger businesses, like very large grocery stores, for example, what would a perfect setup for bathrooms in very large grocery stores look like? Sophia.
I am going to say let's do the European thing and then use every gender is able to use the restroom. I keep on going back to the Buc-ee's. You go to a Buc-ee's and there is the door closest. You cannot see anything outside. You cannot see anything inside. Let's start doing restrooms like that. Why do we need a little line that you can see outside and inside of your restroom? I always find that really creepy. Let's not do that. Let's not do that. Let's ensure that there is privacy in every restroom. And if you have a multi-use restroom, let's make it a universal restroom so that everybody can see, so we can stop this madness. At the end of the day, trans people have been here since the beginning of civilization. We are going to be here. We've always been here, and we're never going not to stop being here because of this laws. We are going to continue existing. We've existed before these laws passed. We're going to exist. I'm here. Landon is here. We are not going to disappear because we are not going to disappear because these laws just became laws. And I keep on telling people it might seem like a lot, but laws uh, become laws, but also laws become laws. There is DOMA, Defense of Marriage Act, right? It became law, and then later on they got rid of the law, right? Ensuring that marriage equality was the law of the land. So with organizing and with hard work, we can make it happen, right? But that is the whole thing. We need to organize and we need to work at it. And if you are tired, take a break. Organizing is never going to stop.
Thank you, Sophia. And those that have not yet been to the Austin PBS restrooms, they are the most inclusive bathrooms I've ever walked in. I had a tour of the building about 3 or 4 years ago, and I burst into tears at thinking about how safe they felt for all of my trans and non-binary and intersex friends. So it is completely possible. I would say with the Buckies are still segregated by gender, aren't they? But they had the floor to ceiling doors, so maybe they can just like wrap around. Who knows? I can't believe that we're having to spend Transgender Day of Visibility talking about where people go to the toilet. It's just, we have about 7 minutes left. Thank you, Amber. Thank you so much. Yes, that sounds great. I've got you, Amber. Thank you. So Amber is going to be leaving right at 1. Amber has another meeting. Thank you so much, Amber, for providing ASL interpretation for us. We really appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you. I think that we'll ask this one other question, given we've got 6 minutes left on the call. Are there zoning laws in Texas that require businesses to segregate multi-stall restrooms by gender? And this is actually something that I've heard people say. It's like, what happens if I make all of my restrooms gender inclusive, but then could there be a zone or could there be a law that goes into place that requires me to segregate them? What are your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so at least for public buildings, right, the state law would preempt any local laws. I'm not aware of any individual cities for private businesses zoning something like that. But if you have I'm going to call it a country club or a club where you have membership, and that membership is limited to whomever within the context of that club, they can do what they want with respect to the bathrooms. So that's a little bit, they're sort of they get sort of an out in the law. But so maybe that answers, and I don't know, Landon or Sophia, if you have more to share, please do.
Yeah, I never also thought I would be learning so much about bathrooms. It's really ridiculous, but had a really cool meeting with with the American Institute of Architects, the LGBTQ affinity group here in Austin, and they were able to give us a little bit more insight into what like plumbing codes look like, what are the limitations, and it seems like the codes that are required to be followed, especially in terms of new builds, construction, anything like that, are mostly around how many fixtures, so like toilets, sinks, all of that. and ADA compliance. So how much space is between a door? Does it allow for somebody who's in a wheelchair to access that space? Things like that. And so there are a couple different codes or a couple, yeah, different plumbing codes that apply and that different localities follow. But it's mostly the 2018 International Plumbing Code if you're really, really into looking that up. But as long as you have enough toilets and fixtures, it doesn't matter if it's gendered or not. So like Shelley said, there's, state law will still preempt local law, and there may be limitations in publicly owned institutions like Austin City Hall, for example, but generally that's what it is.
We do, multiple cities in Texas do have what I'm going to call where they have comprehensive non-discrimination ordinances that apply to public spaces. So when you look at employment, when you look at public accommodations, concert halls, etc., Austin has one, Dallas has one, Colleyville, Irving, not Arlington anymore. Houston does not have one, but those are there. But we passed a state law last legislative session in Texas that I'm going to call the Death Star bill, which now says that the state of Texas can reach into cities, and for those particular ordinances that might apply in a city, the state can say, no, they don't apply. So you really, in this context of bathrooms, you've got the state law that specifically looks at bathrooms. And then in those particular cities whereby you used to not be able to discriminate in a public place, in a bathroom, as a result of what I'm going to call the Death Star bill, the state can come in and say, well, not so fast. Your city ordinance no longer applies.
Thank you. We've only got 2 minutes left, and Masha has typed the question in. So I think what I'm going to do is actually use the remainder of the time to leave people with resources, and then Masha will follow up with you to get answers. And I also envision that we'll post something like with a Q&A, like we'll make sure that everybody gets information resources from this conversation. I also want to thank Laura Friedman, who's on the call. Laura and her wife Layla own 2 restaurants here in Austin, El Raval and City. And so this evening at 5:30, we're having a happy hour to celebrate and honor our trans family at El Raval. So thank you for that, Laura. And so one of the audience members asked, are there ways or resources to ensure our trans siblings know that a business has neutral restrooms? Being a member of the Austin LGBT Chamber, of course, you can put your detail on. That might be a first step. But to my panelists, like, what resources would you like to direct? Like, what would be your closing remarks from this conversation?
So there is an app/website. It's not the best. It's called Refuge, and it basically people can submit where has public restrooms, most of which are gender neutral, and folks can access that list. I say it's not the best because it lags and it's not fully up to date. At Tent, we are starting, or we have what we call our Star Guide, highlighting supportive businesses, and would be happy if you're a business that has gender neutral restrooms to include y'all on that list. We'll have to submit to be included, and I can send our link to Fiona to be shared afterwards. But a lot of smaller organizations and community members are also doing their own mapping of that type and figuring out where in their specific cities, counties, on their school campuses, where the gender neutral restrooms are and folks can access.
We do have resources. I can send you, Fiona. I'm also going to say towards malicious compliance.
You go. I'll also share info. Map the Movement Advancement Project, for those of y'all who are traveling to other states, is a great resource for where there are bathroom bans and many other LGBTQ laws. They map them. And then please reach out to our help desk as well. And Thanks y'all for being here. And I'm so grateful to be on this panel with everyone.
We are extremely grateful for you three. Thank you so much, Landon, Sophia, and Shelley. Thank you to all the audience members. We will send out email with a link to this video and the resources. And happy Transgender Day of Visibility. We love you all. Thank you. Bye.